Welcome to our webinar using emission indexes to transparently communicate performance to charterers from our sponsors, Shipnext. Our guest speakers today are Alexander Varvarenko, founder and CEO of Shipnext. If you have any questions about the topics today, please type them in the Q&A section and we'll get them answered for you at the end of the presentation. Here is our host, Carl Jeffrey from Digital Ship, to explain more.
Our webinar today is about how we can make a more useful indicator of vessel emissions. So we're going to use that in the business relationship between cargo owners and shipping companies. So that's for a cargo owner that wants to choose a vessel which can move their cargo for the least emissions. And we're thinking about this because CII is not so useful to cargo owners as an indicator. There's lots of reasons. So CII rewards ships which go on longer voyages because they spend more time of the year moving cargo and less time in port. But the cargo owner doesn't care about how long a ship spends in port during a year. CII says nothing about how much emissions a vessel is going to make in ballast before it can move a specific cargo, but that's something a cargo owner might care about. CII has got a big time lag. So there's a time lag from when the ship performs badly to when it gets its lowest score, and there's a big time lag between if it makes any improvements to make the indicator better and when the highest score actually happens. But the charterer wants to know about your performance today. So this isn't a criticism of CII because CII was designed for a different purpose, for regulators to gradually reduce the emissions of the world fleet over the next 30 years, but we can have multiple indicators at the same time. So the most useful indicator for a cargo owner would tell them what the emissions that their entire voyage would cause for a certain ship. So the cargo owners can compare different choices of vessel. So we're going to hear today from Shipnext. They operate an online platform which shares data calculated in this way. It's designed to make it as easy as possible for companies to generate the data because it's based on data they're collecting already. And the service is offered to brokers, charterers, and owners. And it's designed for all kinds of ships. We're starting off with dry shipments, break bulk, dry bulk, heavy and oversized shipments, and containers, and tankers are coming very soon. And we're going to hear today from Alexander Varvarenko, who's a shipping and technology entrepreneur based in Belgium. He developed the service as part of his software called Shipnext, and it's called the Shipnext Carbon Intensity Indicator. So I'd like to invite Alex to explain how it all works.
Yes, hi Carl, nice to meet you all, and today I have the pleasure to discuss this topic. I think this is a very important topic, and my presentation is clear on the screen,
yep.
Right? I feel like this is now a growing problem, pushing everybody to invest more money into an ever efficient engines. Taking very sometimes dramatic decisions to transform onto cleaner, more economic and efficient vessels, and this transition will take time. Nevertheless, there's still a problem out there because the emission index, which is proposed by the IMO or adopted by the IMO, bears some very important potentially critical problems, which will be more and more noticed on the daily business. The current CII index is also, quite criticized in the last months by several industry leaders, shipping companies, as being illogical. Innovations, however, that are necessary to have a greener tonnage are taking place. Nevertheless, they are also quite expensive. Ship owners do have to bear this burden of investments into cleaner technology, but nobody clearly knows which is going to be the most efficient technology in years to come. We know those who invest in ammonia, hydrogen, electric. Nevertheless, this alone poses problems and also increases the cost of transportation. So transition does bear many of these economic risks as well, because it's going to increase the cost of transportation in the short and medium term. Now, what is a CII? We all heard of this. You probably know this is a carbon intensity indicator. it's an annual operational carbon intensity indicator. So apparently it has to be telling you how much emission is exhausted by a vessel over 1 year period. And the formula is down below. You can see it's unfortunately not that straightforward. It bears a relevance to capacity. And that's how the formula is. Capacity could, as we know, could mean also deadweight cargo capacity, or deadweight as it's referred sometimes in many of the articles and explanations. And then it's also multiplied by correction factors. And it gets even more complicated when we go into EAXI. So this is an energy efficiency design index. And you see the formula below. It's quite complex. So what it boils down to is that the whole process of calculating this, and I remind you that there's even more transition taking place, because there are EUAs, emission quotas that you can actually purchase to give you a possibility to hedge your risks on the transition. But all this basically relates to the fact that there will be more and more costs of this transition taking place in different companies, shipping companies per se, that will have to do all these calculations, mostly by hand, because there are no actually tools to either monitor or clearly, transparently track the actual figures. Now, this is an image taken from the IMO website, and there are quite a number of ambiguities in that message alone. So it relates to the CII rating. As you can see, I outlined the fact that it's an operational performance index. So operational, but it does refer to a year. So each year, ships of 5,000 gross and above. So that means that you have to then collect all the information over a year and file that report. But it does relate not only to the not to the cargo that you've carried, but actual deadweight. So it's already very much complicated and doesn't reflect the actual consumption or the how green or let's say polluting the ship is. And then it does refer to how do you improve the cargo intensity, and it does refer to weather routing. Now let's consider that I have to, as a charterer, choose between the two ships, and one is consuming less, the other consuming more. How am I going to say, okay, let me choose the one that is more consuming, because I think that it's going to be stuck in a much more preferred weather, and it will at the end be greener. I mean, there's just no way how this can be implemented on the practical side. And also, just-in-time arrival says nothing to me in terms of how you can actually define between the 2 or 3 or 10 ships sometimes, which of them is going to be just in time or not just in time. And then when you go into the right picture, this is also something that you see very often, but what many don't notice is that there are no figures actually. So there are rating A, B, C, D, E, and you see the y-axis. There is actually no figures. So when it comes to the practical side of things, there's still a lot of question marks on how which one is the B or the C. So no clear measurement. That's one of the things which I really feel is going to be a weak side of the whole system. So, and this is why I feel that it's like a bit pointless to argue which of the ships is a B or an A or a C. There is a formula, but with all the correction factors and so on, it's not that straightforward. It is tied to deadweight. Therefore, for example, and we will look into cases where just now it's not that straightforward which of the two ships is a greener one, and it's arguable, as we will discuss. calculated on annual basis. Again, you have to wait a whole year until you actually say or hand in a report. And finally, no relevance to the vessel's actual efficiency. So let's look at the several case studies. Now we are looking at two ships, very similar capacities, similar deadweight. One is just greener than the other one. So I colored the polluting one in red. They all come from different distances. So the greener ship being more further away from the port of loading than the more polluting one, than B. And at the end, as you can see, it all comes to the actual CO2 produced. And the CO2 produced for a greener ship is actually larger or bigger than the one of a polluting ship. They both have same capacity. So what it also means is that per ton, the more polluting ship is going to produce double the CO2 per ton of cargo or per deadweight. So here you see a clear example how measuring by deadweight doesn't actually show you the exact figure. Now let's look at the other example here. You have a green vessel or greener ship also ballasting 7 days. And eventually also producing just the same amount of CO2 as you see in general, but when it comes to per ton, the measurements are then twisted, and again the greener ship shows a much smaller. The greener ship being a more consuming ship and at the end and more polluting ship because of its intake in this particular case shows that it produces much lesser CO2 per ton. Now let's imagine they are all both at the same distance, so 2 days away, both green and red ships. They come to, as you know, this then basically same port B, but here logically the greener ship produces less CO2 per voyage, but then but then again the situation changes when you start looking at the intake. So let's look at this particular case, the 5,000 ton of cargo loaded on a greener ship coming from a 7-day distance versus a more polluting ship coming from a 2-day distance. At the end, they will still show very different results. So the greener ship, because it has less cargo on board, will produce much more CO2 and much more CO2 per ton of cargo. So it's nothing to do with the dead weight, which is what the IMO formula shows on the CII, but actually very much plays differently in relation to the actual cargo on board. So both the CO2 in general can be different just because the ship has many more days to go ballast, but also the CO2 per ton of cargo is also almost double just because there is less cargo on board. So these are all very, very important examples, and the amounts of money you have to pay on top if you're talking about EUAs. And here is one of the benchmarks of December that we use here, $89 per EUA. So the possibility to produce a ton of CO2 for a greener ship is actually double, because you just produce much more CO2 on a route where you have a much longer ballast. So very, very, significant difference there when it comes to the intake and the distance that the vessel has to travel. So therefore, the solution that we promote is we definitely think that There's just no way it's going to work on the year basis. A calculation like this does not take a lot of factors in mind, and it does not take also in consideration the amount of cargo that is on the ship in order to enable you to track the actual impact or ecological impact. So the emissions that we propose are the emissions that are based on the cargo actually shipped. So this is one very important element that we think should be taken into consideration. It's going to be important both for the customers who eventually pay for this and for the ship owners who are in the middle of this transition period. They still have, let's say, 5-10 years to wait for their new buildings, but in the meantime, they're not punished because they may be at the end a more efficiently operating shipping company. They are more better on parceling, for example, or utilizing their free space or their deadweight capacity. And therefore, they are just a more efficient, greener operator altogether. We do promote a well-grounded calculation, and the only way to deliver this well-grounded, logical, transparent calculation is to make it per voyage. So every time you create a voyage or fix a cargo, plan a voyage, you need to have a very clear, very easy access to that benchmark, just like you are using Google Maps and you see the rating of each restaurant or hotel or whatever other public facility. You should be able to measure clearly the options of delivering your cargo as clear and as easy as that public facility. And therefore, using a platform would simplify things, because otherwise, without a platform, you would need to have a lot of this done manually. And finally, two other points is that we believe that both the ship owners and the shippers should bear this burden of transition. It's not fair to dump it all on the owners. Again, they may be operating in their own space. They employ sometimes very sophisticated tonnage that is already quite specialized in the cargo or the trade they do. They are running on closed circuits, so laden both ways sometimes, and therefore they are much more efficient than many other ships that are greener and have to go ballast a longer way just because they're greener to pick up another cargo. So this is also reflected in the formula that we propose. So the current formula, once again, of the CII takes into consideration the capacity of each ship. So that and also the correction factors. Whereas what Shipnext promotes as a platform that allows you with, for instant freight matching is a calculation of the distance traveled by the ship laden and also ballast, and divides it by eventually by the amount of cargo carried. So this is a very important element that differs Shipnext index from a IMO index. In that relation, it's just more logical. And again, I refer you to the examples that we've shown in the case studies. And this is how we reflect it. So it's very easy approach. You basically create a cargo, link it to the vessels which are in position to carry your shipment, and you have an instant access to the amount of CO2 produced per ton of cargo. It can also be reported in the per ton per mile, but we do consider that both ships at the end will, first of all, it's much easier to reflect it in the per ton. It's just an easier red number. Otherwise, it will be too small and too long to reflect this way. But it can also be reflected in color indicators, but nevertheless, it can also be reported per ton per mile moved. The only thing that we believe that both all of these ships will at the end travel the same distance laden. Therefore, you can disregard the distance part. So why our solution is one of the ways to solve this matter for the industry is that, again, it's instant, very easy to use. It's has an optimization effect. So the algorithm runs behind, allowing you to optimize and the efficiency of the ships. And for the owners, it allows you to optimize the planning. So the intake, combine different cargoes on each ship, look for a combination of cargoes to optimize your intake. So it's a lot about this Uberization effect in the industry. Even though we don't intermediate the space, there are plenty of brokers working through the platform already, each representing their own fleet. But the optimization is there. The algorithm optimizes how you would, where are the better matching ships closer to the port of loading. And therefore, the algorithms are in place for that platform to be running more transparently for everyone's benefit. So I will be happy to answer questions. I wanted to make it as interactive as possible. So Carl, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so we'll go to the Q&A. If you'd like to put in questions, I can see one in there already from Alex Stewart. No, I think, the overwhelming idea I hear is that we all have to understand this stuff. I mean, I thought I understood it, but I realized watching this, there's a lot I didn't understand. And I imagine a lot of people in the same way. I hadn't realized that CII was about the capacity of the ship, not the cargo carried. That's when people talk about the moving ships around empty to get a good CII score. And I guess it's all, another thing. So Shipnext itself, you're kind of matching cargoes to ships. That's what you're doing. So this is a component of the service you're offering to get this in the broader context of what Shipnext is doing. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, we are not the first to do it. I mean, this is something that's happening already in the passenger travel, the taxis, the airlines. So we don't we don't see that it's that much of a different space. It's all in transportation. We just help you match your demand to the best supply, and this is considering all the big data that needs to be managed. No matter how complicated your cargo is, it's matched to the ship, which can match all the restrictions, technical parameters of the cargo, restrictions at the port of loading and discharge, and be there on time. So it's the optimization which should take place. Moreover, we patented the transition from an email-based industry, and as you know, shipping is all about email and message communication historically since the 90s. So we believe that there is just so much real-time data and so many things that each shipping manager has to do that it just cannot be efficiently managed through emails or telephone calls. So that platform approach was something that we believed in, and we patented this transition, launched the platform in 2019 in the pilot mode. Now it's up and running.
And then ship owners sign up to your service today, like a travel agent with Booking.com, a accommodation owner signs up to?
Owners, time charter operators, brokers are very much using the platform. We know of deals that are done on a daily basis through Shipnext. Right now, we are onboarding one of the largest European tanker companies. So we, as you rightfully pointed out, we will have also tanker transport done through Shipnext. Yeah, that's the right.
Yeah. If you want to stop slide sharing now, we can see you a little bit larger. And yeah. So there's a question coming from Alex Stewart. He's asking about how you're calculating the consumption speed curve data. I don't know if you've mentioned any speed curve data, but does that come from the But this is modeling the ship performance itself. I don't think you're doing that. You're taking data
No,
from the.
I think again, if you sorry, who was the question from?
So well, he's saying, where does the consumption / speed curve?
I know, but who was the one that asked the question?
Oh, Alex Stewart. I don't know who he is actually. I'm just asking for.
So I feel that when you speak of that, you have to compare two things, right? So one approach is the IMO approach, where you have to then report a year later what was your consumption a year ago, 9 months ago, and why was that on the curve, and that of a voyage approach. So in our case, we just take the laden data for the reporting reasons. Yeah, so you have the design speed and design consumption. Of course, you can have it different, but also you have a possibility to also report a different speed consumption having access to your ship. So we do collect also different speed and consumption figures from different sources. One is the satellite data. The other one is a design speed and consumption. But there are also individual inputs of that data in the system, and that can also be compared. But every owner, every TC operator, every broker has access to their ships that they represent on the platform. They can always adjust that speed if they feel it's different. And here, I think this is Alex, this is a very important issue, because somehow, in my understanding, the most delicate and private and confidential aspect about shipping is the time charter equivalent, let's say the time charter index. Whereas the speed and consumption, you should not actually hide this. I mean, I know that some brokers feel that this is a delicate information, and I appreciate that. This is some know-how that they feel they collect, and owners try to hide it. But if we are looking at transparency on the market, and we are all after building a more efficient industry, should we actually hide the speed and consumption figures? I mean, I remember a case in my shipping career when, and I will not give names, but I once remember a ship was chartered. Her design speed was 14 knots. Eventually, the vessel did 8. And the argument from the owner came, he said, this is a ship, it's a German ship, it's built in Germany, it cannot misperform. So, I think there should be more transparency in that sense, with more real-time adjustments on what is the actual speed and consumption figures.
Okay, so this question now, Wilfred Williamson, who's a marine engineer with CGM in Marseille or Geneva, looking on his LinkedIn page, but he's asking about real weather fouling that's going to impact the actual performance. But you're putting all this to one side. I think you're not. This is all happening.
I mean, if you're considering, I always try to simplify things so that it's much easier to understand which way is it going to be. So imagine you are choosing between two taxis. One arrives in 5 minutes, the other arrives in 15 minutes. Are you really considering which of them will be stuck in the rain, or or which one will be stuck in traffic? You can't really track that, can you? I mean, so it's all about decision making, right? We are putting it on the client. So the client needs to decide, okay, this is a greener ship because it has a little green A marker there. Okay, what's the explanation? It has a lesser consumption. I already showed you examples that say, no, it's not greener because it sometimes has to go a longer ballast period. So it's not greener. All right. Do you really need to compare the weather impact? I don't think so. You can't really predict which of the two ships will be stuck in a more favorable weather. That's our approach to this, Carl. I don't know.
That makes sense. Yeah. Well, there's an important point here. So this is all happening like a month before the actual voyage, or whenever the ship is being fixed, isn't it? But so a lot of data isn't available, but also you're getting some prediction somehow that what the ship is going to do based on normal weather conditions. So I don't know, you must be getting that from
but when you are, I mean, at the reporting phase, you can always amend this figure. I mean, also, again, the choice is who's going to do this reporting. Do you Do you want a whole new department in the company for that kind of reporting? Because remind you, some shipping companies have 500, 600, 700 ships in their fleet. Do you really need to do all that reporting in a separate building, or can you automate it? Because it can be automated. If you can automate that, why do you need to do it manually a year later, a month later, a voyage later? You can also have a double reporting, one before the shipment and one after the shipment, in terms of how much CO2 have you actually consumed. But again, that can also be automated at the end.
Oh, so a question now from Sonia Lavranu, who's from the technical department of Star Bulk in Marousi, Athens, asking, are charterers going to trust the data? Or how are we sure that charterers will trust the data? It's not a regulated data.
Well, I don't quite understand how they can adjust the data.
Well, trust, not adjust, trust.
Trust.
Yeah.
It's a very simple calculation. I mean, it's not that complexity which the EEXI or CII formula has with all the adjustment factors. It's a very simple formula. When you choose, you have two ships. One has one ballast period, the other has another. It works both ways. If you are talking about Shipnext, it works both ways. So you can see yourself where your ship compares to another, and work vice versa as well. In that case, there is no need to adjust the formula to favor one owner against another one. I don't think it actually makes sense, jeopardizing the whole company over that.
But the owner's going to say, look, my voyage is going to do 100 tons of CO2, and another owner's going to say the voyage is going to do 110 tons of CO2.
It's all about speed consumption figures, right? So if that's a speed consumption figure, then all the clients should see, okay, that's the ship that does this speed at that consumption. Sometimes owners say, yeah, but I can do, yes, but is it the design speed? Is it the actual speed? Or is it something that you think that you will, take a different turn, sail into the wind? And, but because that's what everybody can then do. This is very ambiguous. You can never put it into a formula, and you can never make it transparent. So what you will have at the end is, when the reporting comes, you can never have a very transparent system for the decision making. Because what are we talking about? It's not to penalize the owners. First of all, again, I refer to you that if it was, then they shouldn't be penalized if they are efficient, and and certainly the formula does not have to relate to the dead weight. Again, I don't want to go into the case studies, but if you're talking about the decision-making process, because I think that's the most important part for the ship owners, which of the ships is now greener? And for example, Star Bulk has, for example, the old bulkers in place, and they are looking at somehow the new building program, and they have these new bulkers coming out perhaps in 2030. But until then, is my bulker greener or more polluting if it's just closer? Yes, it may be burning more fuel, but it's just closer. It's a more efficient choice, and that's how we feel will make the industry a bit more transparent, a bit more friendly, where both will take that burden. And I think that's the way forward.
So we have to have a transparent speed consumption model. That comes back to the first question, I suppose.
Yeah, very transparent approach, because okay, and your client should be also aware that this is all transparent decision in terms of indexing. He cannot say, oh, I chose that ship because I know that captain can always come out of the worst of the storms. No, this is a very simple rating based on the actual position, how far you are from that cargo. And you don't have to ballast from China to Brazil if there is a ship in Brazil, for example. It may be greener, yes, but the whole fact of ballasting 30 days, may make it, more consuming, more polluting. So yeah.
It's a simple question, but I don't actually know the answer. How much consumption changes between a loaded ship and an unloaded ship? And obviously, it's not much with a cruise ship, but with a tanker, I imagine it's quite a lot.
Yeah, it's a different number for every size, but indeed, for ballast, actually, I'm not sure if in most of the cases, but sometimes a laden ship has a better consumption because the propeller is in the water, and so yeah.
It's not obvious what the difference is, or it's quite okay to say the consumption based on the capacity and the distance, not the cargo it's carrying.
Yeah. I don't feel that hiding speed and consumption figures is correct. So I feel that this is another, I don't know if you remember this, Carl, but when I joined shipping, back in 2000, I remember owners who were very happily enjoying the fact that nobody knows where their ships are. And they would then idle and then keep that kind of. But today, can you actually hide where your ship is unless you really start violating all these regulations and you switch off your radar? So we're living in a different world. So hiding your speed and consumption, I feel, is somewhere from that same story. Like you're trying to do it for a bad cause.
Oh, so we're going back to Wilfred from CMA CGM. Is there a minimum threshold on how many data points of main engine consumption are needed? And can you extrapolate values for the missing point, or do you maintain a database with this information for certain vessel designs? I was thinking maybe you'd have 5 years of data or something to do this. Is this what a...
Well, I don't know about CMA-CGM case. I think I think we're referring to container trade here. We didn't yet come up with a transparent, I think is the most important word here, solution for container trade. I'm sure it's going to be about container intake. Again, not intake per se, because we all know some container ships can also sail, empty or with empties on board, for example, and so it's not. But there must be a system in place. I think it's a bit more digitalized in that case, because there is reporting already. There is data on how many containers each vessel takes. So in the case of container vessels, it has to go more into the actual interoperability between the different systems. But again, there should be an approach based on the intake rather than the containers, the laden containers that were carried, rather than the intake.
Yeah, I mean, containers are fantastic, because if you could show that this routing for your container would be less emitting than this route, I think that'd be enormously valuable. I don't think that's your particular direction, containers, is it? But I mean,
it is, but
it is. Okay. Yeah.
I don't feel it's going to be right to say, okay, it's less emitting because it's going to be carried on a larger ship, or a smaller ship. It's not, it's not about that. And I think that it's more about the efficiency of using this line rather than that one, for a number of other operational reasons. And the word operational, when you speak about operational, you can't really refer to the design element of it. And I feel like the dead weight is more about design and less about operational efficiency.
I would have thought the size of the ship would make a massive difference, wouldn't it? I mean, if you could, you might have different options.
Some larger ships are sailing ballast. I mean, when companies like Oldendorf, I don't know if any of the audience is from there, and G2 Ocean, they went as, my career was also much about parceling. And I remember these, and even now you have a lot of shipping companies like in Panamax or Supramax trade who say, no, parceling, this is definitely not for ships like that. But I think these companies that I just mentioned should be also given a credit for doing much more in terms of parceling. I think that kind of parceling approach makes their ships much more efficient per se. Yeah. So compared to Panamaxes, one is just with bulk cargo under deck, the other one is with deck cargo with blades. It doesn't matter which speed and consumption that other vessel has. If it has deck cargo, it's just carrying much more cargo, being utilized much more efficiently, and most probably also per ton of cargo shipped, it's going to be a much better, greener choice.
Oh, very good. So there's a question here from Ben. I'm not sure where he's from. I share your concerns of CII not considering the actual load or related ballast travels. Can you elaborate a bit on the formula, the two constants, 24 and 3x? I don't remember seeing those in your slides. Is that, do you know what he's talking about there?
24.
Was that in your formula or the CII formula, 24 and? We
Oh
don't remember
yeah,
it.
so it's just the distance laden is divided by the speed, so and then multiplied by the fuel consumption laden.
Okay, so there's no constants 24 on your formula. It's very straightforward. And
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's for shippers to work out the most effective way of moving their cargo, and they'll have different options, and we're getting a kind of semi-granular way of doing it. I think that's an interesting point, isn't it? That you don't need to know all the data to have a good idea, but you can have a rough idea what the best options are for doing it, isn't it? I think that's the main point. So I guess that's where we want to go. I would do all these webinars when you hear Poseidon principles saying banks want to do low emissions and nobody knows how to do it, and tools like this are going to be very important in finding the pathway, isn't it? And I guess we've got to avoid getting stuck in the weeds and just come up with numbers that actually everybody can trust and have a simple enough formula that's but nothing's perfect. I guess that's the kind of summary I'm picking up from what you're saying here, isn't it? I think is a standard calculation of the emissions per voyage is a very simple. It doesn't have to be the Shipnext way of doing it. I mean, anybody can make the calculation, but you're doing the service of gathering the data and sharing it with people. And yeah. So where would you like to go from here then? You want more people to use the service, and you want it to be accepted as an important part of the trading and
Well, I think that there should be more dialogue on these emission indexes. I think that before taking it further, there should be more input from the practitioners. We are one of those practitioners, who can dedicate towards building a more transparent. We certainly don't want this index to be something that punishes and creates more ambiguity. We want this to be a transparent rating system, if you can call it that, and it's just logical to have technology behind it. We are not saying that we are going to be the only one who is delivering this index, but because Shipnext still benefits from the fact that it's one of the few, if you don't want me to use the word only, kind of platforms with this instant freight matching approach. You can have maybe more platforms down the road offering the same approach, but the formula and the relevance to the actual cargo carried can only be done transparently, based on the actual cargo and the actual speed and consumption. So using a platform just makes it much simpler.
Yeah, I've got more things we can talk about. We have a little bit of time. I did a very interesting article for my Tanker Operator magazine about Russian ship-to-ship transfers, taking oil from Primorsk to India and China. Where it says they're doing the transfers in just off Gibraltar, but they go from Aframaxes into VLCCs there. And then the Poten and partners worked out exactly what the money was they made for moving it into bigger ships. So this has been going on for quite a while. I suppose people have been using larger ships to move oil for longer distances and shorter ships to go into ports that the bigger ones can't go into. And they've been thinking about it more for the cost of transport, but emissions will drive a lot more of this kind of thinking. I mean, it's just because it's in Russia, they dug all the details out. But I suppose it's been going on in secret for a long time. But I guess from emissions, we're going to see a lot more transfers from one ship to another, aren't we? I suppose that's another thing we're probably going to see, isn't it? And
yeah,
the people are moving around a lot of empty ships around the place, and they realise it's the cost of doing that gets more and more expensive, doesn't it? And
yeah, I think that the next 10 years will be quite difficult on the owners, because there's there's a lot of pressure to start transforming. Not many know straight away what's the correct strategy going forward. But there's a lot of opportunity down there, which is laying on the surface, which still needs to be used. Again, there are still plenty of opportunity down there to benefit the current players from the way they utilize their ship.
Wow, got a question from AA. I take that as anonymous, talking about the offshore sector. The offshore sector is very difficult because ships are kind of serving platforms rather than moving cargo certain distances. But do you have any comment on the offshore sector, how that would be relevant?
No, not straight away.
Oh, I mean, I've seen all kinds of studies from Aberdeen. People work out much more effective ways of moving cargo to all the offshore platforms, and worked out that it could be done with a third as many ships as it's been doing. But people haven't had to think about it until now, or they maybe don't think about it even now because it's not the highest priority. Making more efficient use of ships. It's more about having ships available. But I guess as emissions gets more and more important everywhere, then all these things people will be thinking about things that they wouldn't have thought about before. I mean, another thing, and the actual, do you need to ship at all, or do you want to ship long distances? And that doesn't show up in CII at all, but it's obviously a big factor in overall emissions, is reducing the amount of shipping we need to do. But I think a service like yours also shows a cargo owner, look, if you're going to move this thing from China to the US, it's going to make this much emissions. Maybe there's another way of doing it, isn't it? Or I guess it's
because you want some of the owners who are still have larger fleet in hand, to suffer from the just unfair, let's say, approach of one client saying, he has a more modern ship, so he's going to be my carrier, just for the fact that it's a greener ship by design, where it just makes no sense. And there are a lot of owners who are keen to transition. This process, as we know, usually takes 10 to 20 years, because a lot of ships that were delivered last year, this year, they are all there to operate for the next 20 years, ideally. There's just no need to put that much stress on those owners just for the sake of the design alone. They can be as efficient or as green as anybody else who has a ship delivered in 2 years from now.
Yeah, I think this issue could be that, it's biggest in the whole shipping industry. It's one thing, it's right at the top. If the whole industry wants to reduce emissions, then the people in charge of shipping have to know what their emissions are going to cause or cause to be emitted, and make decisions based on that, isn't it? And
yeah.
And then the whole thing, and then the whole into the banking. That's something we haven't talked about, or time charters. I guess this is a very voyage-based system, but I guess that's simply because that's what shipping industry does. It does voyages. But I suppose for banks and time charters, you see this also having relevance, or they perhaps more looking at the more annualized view that the CII gives them. I don't know. Do you have any? That's something you thought about, or I guess you're thinking mainly of voyages so far, aren't you? I think it was.
Do you mean whether we have any other strategy in place except the voyages?
Well, say you've got a bank that wants to reduce there's Poseidon principles. They want to reduce the emissions of all the vessels on their loan book, or insurers doing the same kind of thing. And for that means taking a more longer view than voyage by voyage. But I guess perhaps it's still useful for them, or simpler for them, to see their data in the terms of the way you're presenting
I think banks in general should be also pro transparency of the way their assets are managed. So if there is any ambiguity in how the assets that they've invested in are treated, that should be their concern. So a platform should bring more efficiency. So think of, again, any civilian or public transport. If you as a bank, if you invest in assets, you would want them to be operated efficiently. Think of 10 cars that you buy for a taxi service. Do you want them to work the old way when it's all on telephone and connections, or do you want it to be running in an efficient space? And I think that should give you an answer to where the banks are in all of this. I think it's very important for their fleet to be running in the most efficient ecosystem. And one way of doing that is using technology.
Yeah. Do you envisage any of this data would be public? I suppose, or maybe it'll be private, just like financial data, I suppose, would it? It doesn't need to be public.
Do you want to keep hotel booking pages private? You can't keep that really private, right? So everybody has access to any ship's data except the financial data online now. You can type in the name of a ship, IMO number, and you can have plenty of information online. So there's no privacy. It's just a question of how long do you spend to find that data. And that's one of the approaches that we adopt as well. All the information is there. The speed consumption figures, as long as they are not privately reported and so on, that of course is private and confidential. But again, I feel that down the line, a lot of the speed and consumption figures will be more transparent in a way. And one of the way to do that is to benefit those that are open with this open index approach, right? So if there is indeed better speed and consumption and lower consumption of the ship, it shouldn't be hidden. It should be there, showing everybody that this ship today is more economic than, it is by design.
Yeah, there's two other services I'm aware of where companies offering to give emission data about every ship. There's one called Bearing, which is an AI-based model of every ship in the world, and another one called Right Ship, which is very well known, but they do a GHG rating of every ship. It's kind of their assessment based on data they have available. I suppose the point is...
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm very careful when using the word AI. Sometimes it's just about an algorithm. I'm quite sure, but this may be a design index. It's not an operational index. We are not per se arguing about the design index of a ship, but judging on the case studies that I showed you, the design index doesn't necessarily make a greener ship more eco-friendly. So our index is not a design index. Those companies that use platforms to give you the index of each ship, I think are more about design index. We are more about operational index. So EEOI, EAXI, CII, all these are reportedly by IMO, they are operational indexes. But when you start talking about operations, two companies operate completely different, and that way of different approaches, different way of operating is also partly about how efficient they utilize their dead weight capacity. So we are about not the dead weight, but the actual utilization of that space, and we believe it's better. So if you're using a car that carries 3 passengers and not 1 passenger every time, and it doesn't need to do three loads, 3 voyages, and does it all in one, you are just more operationally efficient. And that's the approach for ships as well. You have to make sure that you utilize your space better than the others, and this is one way to make your ships also eco-friendly.
Yeah, that's so clear. But an operational index is based on actual fuel consumption, or is the actual fuel consumption is based on the design index? I guess whichever you have, isn't it? It's not a...
Well, I can of course elaborate on this, but we are comparing. We have to be comparing chickens to chickens and eggs to eggs, right? So here we are talking about ships that I have to choose from a screen like this, and each one of these ships can have a totally different speed and consumptions, and this is how it works on the practical level. So if you are talking about financial modeling and judging on competitive advantages of each one of them, there are only 2 things or 3 things that you have to bear in mind. How, if they come on time, if they can match your laycan dates, if they are the right choice in terms of freight, and also if you're talking about the freight, you will end up paying a bit parts of the EUAs, or these emission charges, and that's yet another problem. And there is no way it's going to be an easy exercise if you have to do it on pen and paper. So automating it and helping companies calculate it and then put it in the rate, and also provide you with a transparent way of measuring that, it's one more way of helping you choose which of the 2 ships you need to use. And if somewhere behind the curtain it's based on the fact that this ship is just greener technically or design wise, or is it because it's a shorter ballast run? Then be it, right?
Oh, very good. Well, we're coming to the end now. I think you've shown a view of the future. I think it's going to be a lot more of these kind of discussions coming up about how charterers can get the right kind of ships that reduce their emissions and how owners can compete in the market based on emissions. It's a fascinating subject and there's a lot more to it, I think. And I don't know if you have any final words you'd like to leave the audience with before we finish.
No, well, I think we all, in the audience, and I'm not sure which companies are represented by. I'm calling on everyone to actually be open more to the use of technology to automate some of these things, the routine operations, to simplify things, and also to make better use case of all the opportunities that exist today. So I think that's one of the messages I would like to close off with. And thank you, Carl. Thank you, and wish you all a good weekend ahead.
Well, thank you. And I'll pass back to Farah for the closing words. Thank you very much. Well,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to our guest speaker, Alexandra Vavarenko, founder and CEO of Shipnext, and to all our viewers. We'll be sending you a YouTube video link soon with contact details if you have any further questions. Join us for our vessel performance info webinar on the 20th of April with Fuqua, which you can book online at our website. Goodbye.
bye-bye. Oh.
Bye-bye.